Does that seem to be the case? You know, another thing that I noticed, though, is that also every year, Thanksgiving gets less and less attention, which is a shame. Which is why we left the pumpkins up and kept the tree in mothballs for at least one more week. And, you know, what's sad, not only is Thanksgiving being ignored, but with the rewriting of history and all of the critical theory, it's being distorted. And it's being considered a myth. And people are portraying the Pilgrims as being these genocidal maniacs that had nothing more in mind than to come here, pillage and plunder and steal land and gain wealth from this uncharted territory, which is the furthest thing from the truth. But you figure if people can deny that something as significant as the Holocaust even happened, it's no surprise that they can dismiss and distort and try to deny Thanksgiving and the fact that the Pilgrims came with pure and honorable motives. And so, it's kind of been our tradition, it's been my tradition, to spend this Sunday, the last Sunday of Thanksgiving, to focus on Thanksgiving and to celebrate the Pilgrims and their faith and the heritage that we have in them. And so we're going to do that again this morning. Pastor Charlie hinted at that, and so we'll make his hint a reality. You might recall from last year that 2021 was the 400th anniversary of the first Thanksgiving. And so we spent all last time surveying the history of Thanksgiving, starting with the 1500s and King Henry VIII. Don't know if you recall, but let me just touch on that just by way of introduction before we really start what I want us to get into later in this message. But you might recall 1500, King Henry VIII. He broke ties with Rome, primarily because he didn't want to be under the authority of the Pope. He had personal reasons for doing that, but because he broke ties with Rome, the people were kind of excited, thinking that he would usher in reform that had already started to take place in Germany under Luther and was moving into Switzerland and Scotland and other places. So Henry breaks away, but he doesn't reform the church like people had hoped. Although he did authorize the printing, the publishing, and the placement of the English scriptures into every parish in the land. And so that was a change, and that was a blessing, and that was a very good thing. Unfortunately, it didn't do enough to change the church. It still resembled the Church of Rome. Catholicism was still by and large practiced as opposed to honoring the pure teaching of the gospel. But one thing that it did do was it gave rise to two separate groups of believers. One was called the Puritans, and the other were called the Separatists. Anyone remember what the difference was? You know, son.
The Puritans wanted to reform the church. The Separatists wanted to just bail out and leave them behind.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Puritans thought that they could kind of subvert the church from the inside. So they stayed a part of the state church, thinking that they could be an influence and reform it by them seeking to worship in the true biblical way. So they stayed connected with the state church. The Separatists, on the other hand, believed that the church was already broken beyond repair, that it couldn't be reformed. And so they broke away from the state church and started their own congregations, which was illegal and was considered a crime against the state. It was treasonous to the king. And it was punishable by heavy fines, by confiscating property, by imprisonment, and even by execution in some circumstances. And so those separatists that chose to worship did so at their own risk. But they continued to worship separately. They continued to have their own congregations for a number of years. But when the pressure got too hot, they fled England. And they went to Holland, where there was religious freedom. And they set up their own congregation there. And it flourished, and it grew. And people came, other separatists came from England and worshiped with them. And they did that for about 11 or 12 years, until the circumstances started to change. The influence of the very liberal, very tolerant society started to take its toll on the young people there. The difficulty of finding jobs to sustain themselves. There was a peace treaty with Spain that had expired, and so the threat of war was looming on the horizon. And so the separatists started to think about making another move. And so they were considering going all the way across the Atlantic to America, to a brand new country. Now, unlike what the revisionists say, it was not to try to conquer new land. It was not try to get wealthy, although they did want to try to find a place